Today, we're talking about what went wrong with the past front office for the Chicago Bulls. We're also going to be talking about Bryson Graham and the new front office direction and why Bryson Graham is off to a great start, which could lead to some long-term success for the Chicago Bulls. And so before we go ahead and we jump into it, I first want to remind you to slam dunk on that subscribe button, just like Modest Pizzelis slam dunks in games, because in exchange for slamming on that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Chicago Bulls. And so make sure that you hit that like, you hit that subscribe, and you join the Chicago Bulls Insider family as we talk nothing but Chicago Bulls basketball. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it as we are talking about what went wrong with the past front office and why we should be optimistic here about Bryson Graham and this new front office. And so if you've not got a chance to see this article was on ESPN.com. This is written by Jamal Collier. The title of this, Inside the Hopeful Resurrection of the Chicago Bulls, What's Next? And so this came out Tuesday, and I know we've been talking a lot about the NBA Summer League and just really talking about the key points to that. And so I wanted to circle back around this because there has been a lot of talk about this article and just really some of the things that were revealed with what was going on with AK and Mark Eversley running the front office for the Chicago Bulls. And so we're going to paraphrase this because this is a lengthy article. Can't read it all. And so we're going to take a look at some of the key points out of that. Definitely, again, make sure that you go ahead and take a look at this. This is a great read. And so I want to start with one of the key points to this article, and it's around Patrick Williams. And so I think that there's a couple different things to think about with what is talked about with Patrick Williams. First, just really talks about the talent evaluation for Mark Eversley and also to AK in their first draft with Patrick Williams. And then also, too, I think it talks about Mark Eversley and really AK and just really what they were thinking as far as pivoting, because I think that that's something else that we're going to talk about with the old management and the roster. And so let's start with just the key points with Patrick Williams. And so it talks about how they really felt that Patrick Williams would compare to Kawhi Leonard. One of the things that's mentioned is his hand size. And so Patrick Williams is nicknamed the Paw. Kawhi Leonard, he's nicknamed the Claw. And so, that was one of the major comparisons that AK and Mark Eversley had about Patrick Williams. And so they really felt that he could be that type of player. And then also, too, it talks a little bit here about the communication going into the 2020 NBA draft, because it talks about how scouting and analytics really pushed for Tyrese Halliburton, but AK and Mark Eversley were really focused in on Patrick Williams. And so, 2020 hindsight, Tyrese Halliburton obviously turned into, a very good player. I think he's still got some room to grow. And then you have, Patrick Williams here, which he still got some time. He's still on the roster and everything else, but it's clear that he just really hasn't lived up to the fourth overall pick. And so, that was the first two key points around Patrick Williams there. And also, too, it talks about the fact that for Mark Eversley and AK, it just takes them long to pivot because it took them about 3 or 4 years to come off the fact that he's not going to be Kawhi Leonard. And so, continuing on with Patrick Williams and taking a look just really at the numbers for Patrick Williams. And so far in his career, it looks like that his career average as far as points is 9 points a game. This last season, he averaged 7 points a game. As far as his steals, 0.8 for his career. He had 0.7 last season, 0.4 with the block shots, 3 rebounds last season. He averaged 3.9 so far for his career, and 72% from the free throw line. He's a career 76.2%. And as far as his three-point percentage, it has been pretty solid. So 34.7 last season. Took a little bit of a dip, but he's a career 38.1% shooter. As far as his field goal percentage, 37.2% last season. Career 43.8% there. As far as the game started, 6 and played in 72 games there. And so the most games that he's played in, I believe, since the 22-23 season. And so that is a good sign, the fact that he did at least get to the 72 games there. And so, look, with Patrick Williams, I think it's also going to be talked about with his contract. And so, look, the contract, when you take a look at it, it's not anything that I think is going to hold the Chicago Bulls back as far as the salary cap. I think that the biggest issue is just that it's a roster space because, if Patrick Williams is not going to be involved in the rotation, and just really doesn't play up his value, it becomes tough to move Patrick Williams. And it means that the Chicago Bulls would have to attach an asset to him, because when you look at the contract, it's flat across the board at 18 million. And you look at the fact that he has a player option, which is something that AK just gave a lot of players, was the player option. I think that that was one of the bigger issues too with the last front office, is that they put the control into the players' hands. And I think that they didn't put the control into the team's hands, like the club hand, and just being able to go ahead and just cut a player loose. And so, one of the things that's talked about in this article is the contract extension that was signed here, as you see on the screen. And so he's 3 years in, or he's going to be 3 years in. He's got 2 more after that with a player option. And so the fact of the matter is, we don't know if any teams would have offered Patrick Williams anything, because he was an unrestricted free agent. I believe the Chicago Bulls went ahead and they just took care of negotiations before it even got to that point. And so, there's going to be the questions around this deal. But look, I think just from the bottom line here is that it's not anything that's going to hold the Chicago Bulls salary cap up or anything like that. I think the matter is, if Patrick Williams doesn't play any better, how are you possibly going to, move off of him without attaching an asset, which I don't think the Chicago Bulls should be looking to do that. And so next, pivoting off of Patrick Williams and talking about the word pivot, I think that this is something that was talked about as far as just really what this team struggled with. Because number one, talking about, just coming off the evaluation for Patrick Williams, but I just think about some of the trades that should have been made earlier. And so you think about the situation with Vooch. I think that that was a situation that it ran its course. It's something that the Bulls should have pivoted off of early. I think you could say the same thing around DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, and I also could say the same with Kobe White and also to Ayo Dosunmu, because I think that, look, if you were thinking that, look, we want to go ahead and make some moves and this is just not going to work, I think that if you do it a little bit earlier, right, with your pivot point, you're probably going to be able to maximize the assets a little bit more. And I think that that is something that AK and Mark Eversley really struggled with. They were slow to pivot. And so I think that that's another thing that is really brought up in this article when you take a look at this. And so you guys let me know what you guys are thinking in the comments as far as just really the roster decisions, as far as being slow to move off of players, just the evaluation around Patrick Williams and everything else. And so next, I wanted to talk about another key piece to this article, and it's the decisions that were made. And so some of the staffers here, they spoke anonymously in this thing, and so you can go check it out. And so it says that staffers didn't really feel a part of the decision-making process. And so, that essentially means that there was a communication breakdown, so to speak. And so one of the quotes in the article, it says this, when it comes down to it, it says that we would come in for these supposed group meetings, and it was very obvious that the choices had already been made. One ex-front office staffer told ESPN, "You're not doing me any favors by having me sit in the passenger seat with my own fake steering wheel." And so I just thought, wow, when I saw this right here. But again, it just kind of goes into the communication process and just the decisions that were made in that last front office. It just did not seem like everybody was on the same page. And that kind of goes into what we just talked about with that 2020 NBA draft. I think that when you're going into the draft, you need to be listening to just the input from all your staffers and everything else. You cannot go into the situation and think that you're the smartest person in the room. I think that that leads to failure when you're talking about trying to get a team to an NBA championship. And so I think that that is one of the things that is very much talked about in this article, is the communication breakdown. And then also too, it talks about just really the communication as far as what the team was looking to do. And so one of the things that's talked about is just being competitive. They did not use the word rebuild or retool. And so that's something that was talked about. And one of the staffers talks about just really the direction was that they were trying to get younger players on rookie scale deals and just really kind of speed up the timeline of a rebuild that way. And they were looking to go after high picks with something to prove with player experience. And so that's something that we would constantly talk about with AK and just really how he was trying to build out the team. So I don't think that there's really too much new news there. As far as some other points with the communication here, and so we just talked about the choices that were made, and just staffers were there. And then also, too, I think communication around what the moves were. And so, one of the things that's talked about is that it says that some of the staffers basically got alerts on their phone from like ESPN, just letting them know when certain roster moves were made. So the DeMar DeRozan thing, like that was talked about when they learned through ESPN app that DeRozan had been in a sign and trade that got him over to the Chicago Bulls. The Vooch contract extension as well was something that staffers learned via the ESPN alert. And so stuff like that, it just really makes you think like just how bad it was from a communication standpoint. So with that being said, that leads us to now Bryson Graham and why we should feel optimistic. And so towards the end of this thing, this is what it says about just Bryson Graham and his new approach. It says that there's a very, very different vibe. A basketball operations staffer told ESPN, everybody feels it. We're meeting a group beyond 4 people. We're talking about the draft, free agency, hiring a coach. It's not secrecy, and we're not finding out from an ESPN alert. And so, I think that that's huge because what that tells me with Bryson Graham is it tells me that there's togetherness here. And I think that that is really what is huge. When you're trying to build something, when you're trying to win, you have to be on the same page. And I think that that is the very first thing that Bryson Graham has done. He's really put everybody on the same page. He's already shown how terrific he is as a communicator. And even if it's things that, look, as a fan base, we don't necessarily agree with, I love the fact that he is willing to hop on radio stations with the head coach and talk about those decisions and give you those insights and things like that. And so, look, even if it doesn't work out, I love the fact that he's communicating like that. And I think that that is really going to lead to some success there because I think that now, not only are you transparent with your front office, I think that that leads to really some transparency with your players as well. And that's huge because I think that if you're trying to get, these group of players on the same page to play championship basketball, you most certainly need to be transparent. And so I think that that is great. And I think that that is really what we're seeing already in the NBA Summer League. I think with Noah Asingay, it's clear communication, what they are looking for. Tiago Splitter says it in the presser. And then also, too, you hear that from Noah Asingay when they asked about that. And so I don't know if we necessarily would have got that last season, with the last front office and everything. And so that's good to see. And I think with Bryson Graham, you have to feel optimistic about it because he lucked out. He got the 4th pick in this last draft. And I think that he has certainly got it right so far with what we're seeing with Caleb Wilson. And so I get it. It is Summer League and everything else. But I just think that, look, when you take a look at Summer League, you can just tell that these are going to be solid players after some NBA Summer League performances and just really just listening to what they're saying and everything else. And so I think that Caleb Wilson, he is going to be a very good player. How good he's going to be, we're going to find out. But I just think that the upside is certainly something that he can reach when you hear him talk about just going right back to work and the work ethic and getting in the late night stuff and everything else and wanting to play in Summer League. Like he has that drive. And we've seen that before with Modest Buzelis. And he's already a solid player, right? And so I think that he's got some more growth to go on and along with some of these other younger players. And so I think he's off to a good start here with what he's put on the roster with Caleb Wilson. I think that Dalen Swain has a chance to really get things going in the right direction. And so, yes, he had a tough summer league, and so did Noah Asingay. But, these players have a chance to really get some things going because now they get a chance to play with Josh Giddey, an established point guard. You have Trey Jones, who's also an established point guard. And then you're going to pair them with some NBA veterans that are going to provide some defense for you in Nick Claxton, some experience here in Norman Powell. So that's certainly going to help you. And Tiago Splitter, look, he's been in a tough situation and he's been able to pull it together. And so I most certainly think that that is going to help the Chicago Bulls. And so they're focused on player development. I'm not sure that that necessarily was the biggest thing, on the Bulls agenda with the last front office. And I'd say player development, not just individually with what we're talking about with these players, but I do think that what you're going to see now with the Chicago Bulls is the Windy City Bulls are going to be much better. And I think that when you look at the Miami Heat, we talk about the Miami Heat culture and stuff like that, look at what they built up with their G League team. That stuff is important. That stuff matters. And so I think that Bryson Graham is off to a great start with his two-way signings and his 10-day exhibit contract. He's certainly going to change some things up there. Curious to see what the coaching staff and everything else is going to look like once they finalize that. But I do think that now more than ever, if a player does go down, during the season and everything else, because injuries do happen, I think that you can trust the players that they do bring up are going to be able to come in and be an impact for the game. And that's exactly what you want with your two ways and just the players that you have on your G League affiliate team. And so I think that that is huge. And just lastly, when you just look at I think the structure and just having a plan. I think that the plan is very it's right there for you. And I don't think that we necessarily saw that with the last front office. Bryson Graham makes it very clear the type of players that he's looking for. We talked about this with the size, the length, the athleticism, the physicality, right? You need all those things. And so it's very clear with the type of players that he's looking for. He doesn't say that that's necessarily everything, but the fact that he's letting you know that. And then also, too, they're letting you know, like, hey, this is how we want to operate as an organization. This is the standards. Like, that is key for turning things around. This is a guy that is already turning around standards for this team. And so I think that the team will build off of that. I know that, the last front office got off to a good start, so to speak, and, just didn't go that way long term. But I got a feeling here with Bryson Graham that, he's going to turn some things around. And so he does say that, look, this is going to be a process, and he does say rebuild. So I do like the fact that he's using the term rebuild. So anyway, you guys let me know in the comments here what you guys are thinking about some of the key takeaways here from that ESPN article. Once again, this is written by Jamal Collier. We're just paraphrasing this. And so we talked about Patrick Williams. We talked about just the team's inability to pivot off of players just when they should have. And so we talked about Vooch, Ayo Dosunmu, Kobe White, Zach LaVine, and guys like that. And then also, too, just talking about just some of the hope that is around this organization thus far. Just talking about how it's a different feeling right now in the Chicago Bulls building. And then also, too, some of the moves that Bryson Graham has made and the standards that have been set so far that indicate that there could be some real long-term success ahead for the Chicago Bulls. And so you guys let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking here about Bryson Graham. And also, too, I lastly want to say this before we jump out of here. Everything is going to be, looking back at it. Yes, they could have made, a different decision and everything else. So 2020 hindsight, but we're here right now. And so we have to deal with that. And it is what it is. And so anyway, you guys let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking. And look, as we always say, go Bulls. And I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.